First of all, I'd like to thank the Research Development Office for inviting me to speak here today. As Patrick mentioned, I'm a lecturer in the Department of Law, and for the next 4.5 minutes or so, I'm going to speak to you about our research project, Understanding the Needs and Perspectives of Labour Trafficking Victims in Ireland. This project was conducted with my colleagues, Dr. Cliona Murphy, Mairead Murphy, Pablo Roca Capari, and Rachel Wexler. Our analysis draws on 15 structured interviews with victims of trafficking for the purposes of labour exploitation. Although trafficking indicators were identified in all of these cases, only 7 of the participants had been identified or granted official victim of trafficking status. These interviews were arranged by the Migrant Rights Centre of Ireland and conducted on their premises or at a destination or location nominated by the participant themselves. Now, it's been well documented that traffickers use a variety of psychological and physical methods to coerce victims to stay in their exploitative situations. These acts of coercion include physical beatings, death threats addressed to the victim and his or her family, or denunciation to the police and the immigration authorities when the victim's residence or work status is illegal. Trafficking operations are meticulously planned to make victims vulnerable and to create a climate of fear and dependence, and the individuals we interviewed reported a combination of these threats. The level of control in one case led the interviewee to state, "I felt like she owns me even." The most commonly used threat deployed against 1/3 of the workers in this study was that of repatriation or deportation. Other interviewees feared physical harm, while the Filipino participant, similar to trafficking victims in other jurisdictions, was not only threatened with deportation, but also with death if she attempted to escape. She gave a stark account of the power and control exercised by her captor. Trafficked persons are in a particularly vulnerable situation, as the perpetrators often know their victims and their relatives very well, which makes them an easy target for reprisals if the victims testify. One interviewee, for instance, received no direct threats, but her trafficker contacted her family to inquire about her whereabouts, while another stated that the employer continues to threaten her parents in her home country. These experiences are consistent with studies conducted with trafficking victims in other jurisdictions, all of which reveal similar concerns. Labour trafficking victims are not only reluctant to report the crime due to fear of reprisals by their traffickers. Other forms of control exercised by traffickers, again consistent with international experience, included confiscating passports and documentation, and some victims experienced restricted movement even within the workplace. Imposed isolation and deprivation of any means of unsupervised movement were shown to be powerful tools for traffickers. These control techniques included social and linguistic isolation, as well as restricting the victim's exposure to and understanding of the outside world. All participants felt that they had no real and acceptable alternative but to submit to the abuse. Immigration status and control techniques are not the only factors that make trafficked victims reluctant to approach the authorities, immigration officials and NGOs for help and assistance. Trafficking victims fear disclosing their status to the authorities for numerous reasons, including the belief that they have committed a crime and may be subject to arrest and imprisonment. Victims, depending on their source country, may also distrust the police. Such concerns are inevitably exacerbated when the victims do not speak the local language, have little or no knowledge of the destination country, and have no legal status. In this context, the law enforcement response is particularly important, and the participants we interviewed, for the most part, were satisfied with the support provided by rank-and-file police and the staff of the Garda National Immigration Bureau. Trafficking victims are generally reluctant to trust the police, partly due to prejudice against law enforcement agencies in their home countries, but the behaviour and the attitude of the Gardaí was crucial for trust building. This, of course, is not to suggest that the provision of assistance and protection could not have been improved in certain respects, but it does appear that individual Garda were successful in gaining the trust of participants, which is an important first step in providing assistance. Crucially, these victims did not report feeling pressurised to pursue the case or to stay in Ireland, or conversely, to leave. Each of the participants in this study had decided to cooperate with the authorities. However, the reasons that participants gave for pursuing prosecutions varied. These included punishing traffickers, seeking restitution, protecting future victims, and wishing to remain in the jurisdiction. Interviewees particularly wanted to alleviate the potential suffering of others facing a similar plight. On the whole, this research makes clear that trafficking victims are an indispensable source of information about the best ways in which to meet their needs through law and policy initiatives. Victims' perspectives are too often absent from the process of developing policies and measures that directly affect them. As experts on their own needs, victims must be given a central role in the development of evidence-based measures that can both combat trafficking and assist and empower those impacted by it. Thank you for your time.